Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit series video from the subreddit HFY, called The Chronicles of Clint Stone, Chapter 2, Susan, written by some guy named Ted. The link to the original will be down below, as well as the link to the playlist. And as always, I hope that you enjoy, and if you do, please consider subscribing. Translator note: all measurements have been converted to Sol Basic, and all major changes to translations have been noted in text. What do you want to hear about this time? The Rebellion of Scour, where Clint turned pirate and raided several Empire ships. Ah, that's right. I promised you the story of when he flew a ship into a star. That was a nail-biter, let me tell you. Clint and I had only been free for about a month. We had been flying around the stolen Mantis ship from the Noirs, and it was not the greatest ship in the galaxy. Things were always falling off or breaking. One time Clint got so mad at it that he pushed his foot through the wall in anger. So we landed on a junkyard planet, and he got to work on the ship. I was tasked with scavenging for stuff that we could sell on the market for marks. Very boring work, let me tell you, but we got several hundred marks out of it. So, I guess it was worth it. We were there for about a week until Clint finished up with the ship. I walked back from the Valley of Discarded Gold, as I had taken to calling it, with a sack full of variable odds and ends, ahead and in between the towering piles of refuse that made up the planet's landscape. I could see the large clearing that Clint had made into his workshop, piled high with bits and pieces from the ship and others that he'd found in the trash piles. I walked back and I saw Clint tightening down the panel above the warp drive. Is she done? I asked. I had no idea how long Clint was on the ship, and I am not mechanically inclined. But Clint was. That was made plain by the piles of tools and parts lying here and there. That should do it. Let's pack up and get off this rock. I want to take her out for a test drive, Clint said enthusiastically. He gathered his tools and carefully repacked them into a kit that he had fashioned out of discarded trash. Slipping those into a storage hatch, we went for the cabin. He practically shoved me in the hatch as he hurried to take off. I had never seen him so giddy, not even after we got away from the Noir slave market. He slipped into the pilot's seat and pushed the start button. The ship hummed to life. It sounded much better than it had when we first taken it. Then it sounded like a rogmith trying to eat a bag of rocks and chains. It didn't shake either, which was a good sign. It used to rattle with the most awful frequency. Now that it just vibrated a little, a rather pleasant feeling, very relaxing for the neck and head. Clint eased the throttle forward, and the ship lifted off, smooth and steady. So much better than the rough and jerky it had been before. Higher and higher the ship went, gaining speed the whole time, until we were in the upper atmosphere. Here, Clint really let her loose, pushing the throttle past 2/3. The ship flew off into space. I looked over at Clint, and he had the widest grin I'd ever seen. He looked like a kid who just got a pet. No, it was more like a groom when he sees his bride at the wedding. So what's her name? I asked jokingly. Clint grew somber, the grin disappearing from his face. Her name is Susan, he replied, face shadowed and eyes distant, as he seemed to remember someone. Who is Susan? I asked, assuming he named the ship after someone he had known. My wife, he said curtly, in a tone that said there would be no more discussion. I changed the subject. The ship is going to be awfully fast. She's not even in warp, but we've got her going nearly at half-life speed. 2/3 light speed, Clint said. I looked at him in shock. No ship has ever gone that fast outside of warp, I exclaimed, incredulous. What do you do to the engines? Nothing. Just cleaned out the pipes, added a few quantum defoiders, built a new quark processor and a photron binder, and streamlined the warp inhibitor. Nothing anyone else couldn't have done. My brain struggled to comprehend what he just said. When I made the progress into the techno-babble, I realized that Clint said that he built and reconstructed new machinery for the ship to run on. Better than anyone had ever made before. Just who was this human, and was there an end to the things that he could do to surprise me? I noticed out the viewport that the star ahead was just getting awfully big. Really fast. I looked over at Clint, checking to make sure that he knew what was going on. He did, his green eyes fixed intently on the star. I settled back, waiting for him to veer off. He didn't. Clint, there is a star in front of us. You're driving into it, I said, worried. I know, came the response. Good, good. Are you going to change directions? No. What? Was he crazy? We would be caught in the star's gravity and be incinerated. I grabbed the edge of my seat. The star grew closer and closer. Clint reached over and pushed the throttle to 90%. We dove towards the star faster and faster. We were surely going to be burned into a crisp. I didn't know what had gotten into Clint. I may have upset him asking about Susan, but he was overreacting a little bit. What are you doing? I shouted at him. You're going to get us killed. What? He seemed genuinely puzzled, as if he didn't know that we were diving towards the surface of a giant ball of gas exceeding 10,000 degrees. We would be vaporized. The shield should hold. I don't see what you're getting so worked up about. Shields? The ship doesn't have shields. Since when does the ship have shields? Since I built them. Trust me. We're fine. We could fly into the star and survive. Please don't, I asked in a soft voice. I don't think my sphincter could handle it. He laughed at that. He turned the ship around and flew off towards the stars. And that's the story of how Clint Stone, that crazy, suicidal human, flew into the sun with the ship that he had just made the fastest in the galaxy. All to test a shield that he had just built with scraps. And that was not only time that Clint had made something better. The man was a genius with technology. He could take a blender, for food, and turn it into a computer capable of predicting the future. And it would be right. You seem to be interested in Clint. Which story should I tell you next? End of chapter. Chapter number 3. Undone. As a rule, it is usually a bad idea to double-cross anyone. But Clint Stone is not just anyone. The Dive Gang learned that the hard way, that you don't betray the Warfist. When you are on the run from slavers and all you have is a stolen ship, you don't have a lot of options. Clint and I were dirt poor and we needed money fast. One quick discussion in a dimly lit alley turned into a contract with one of the more unsavory elements of society. The Dive Gang of Grongol was one of the most vicious and notorious gangs for hire in this part of the galaxy. They did everything from assassinations to kidnapping, but they had yet to steal a few million marks from the Swarm Bank, the financial arm of the Swarm Empire, otherwise known as the guys who ran everything in this half of the galaxy. Naturally, it was Clint who gave them that opportunity. He planned everything, and he provided most of the muscle and resources. All he really needed the gang for was the distraction, and they were good at that. The hallway was deserted, stretching 50 feet in either direction. Usually this hallway was full of guards, but they had all been drawn off for the severely strategically planned explosions and plasma shots. Set in the center of the flat metal expanse, the vault door was an impressive sight. 8 feet tall, 10 feet wide, and 4 feet thick. The door was constructed of a titanium and graphene alloy, one of the strongest materials in the galaxy. Even a direct hit from a nuclear weapon couldn't destroy it. The wall around it, sure, but the door would still remain intact. Clint was currently standing next to the door at its weak point, the control panel. I stood next to him, giving him tools as he needed them. He had hooked up some ridiculous-looking machines to the panel and was currently trying to hack into the most secure system in the universe. The Srun were well known for their love for money, and equally known for the ability to protect it. He would fail, of course. No one had ever succeeded, though hundreds had tried. "You will fail, door not open," said one of the members of our little group in the hallway. Doinf, the leader of the Doinf gang, stood behind me, his arms crossed. Doinf was a Yuan, one of the blue-skinned beings with only one eye. He had insisted on coming with us to the vault while the gang dealt with the guards. "Give it time. It's not like I'm just picking a lock. This is delicate work here. Clint was an exasperated voice. Doimf had said similar things for the last 3 minutes as Clint worked on the door. You will fail, we will fail, I not go jail. Be patient, snapped Clint. I go too long. He turned to leave. Ding! The door slid open. Doimf and I stared in amazement. Clint Stone had done the impossible. I had seen him rebuild a ship that could nearly break the speed of light outside of warp, but that was nothing compared to this. This was equivalent to making a ship that could jump from one end of the universe to the other in a single second. Clint looked at the wine, went with a flat look, and then strode in. We filed in after him. The room was enormous, hundreds of feet in either direction, and everywhere I looked there were shelves, piled high with bars of gold. Jewels winked amongst the gold, and priceless works of art lined the walls. But it was the gold that was truly impressive. There was enough here to feed the galaxy for decades, and this was just 1/100th of what the vaults of the Empire had stashed away throughout the multitude of systems it controlled. Well, don't just stand there gaping at it. Load some of it up, Clint said, breaking us out of our awe-struck stillness. He threw bags at us. I caught one, and he went to nearest shelf. I started to shovel gold into the bag. It grew heavy very quickly. Finally, I could not fit any more in the bag, and I turned to Clint. He was already standing there, 2 bulging bags slung over his shoulders. The Uine had a bag as well. Struggling under the weight of my bag, I followed them out of the vault door. We hurried down the hallway into the back room. The guard should be held for another few minutes, but it never hurt to be ahead of schedule. Bursting through the door to the back alley, there were 3 of us jumped into a waiting transport. Drive! Clint ordered. The car shot forward as we were off, mixing in with the event traffic. The driver weaved between the other transports and made it down the main road in a couple miles before turning off into the warehouse district, where we would meet up with the rest of the gang and split the riches. A particularly run-down warehouse appeared before us, wide doors hanging open, and the driver pulled inside. The door shut behind us, and the transport coasted to a stop. Clint opened the door, and we spilled out. The transport had not been designed for someone the size of Clint in mind, and it had been rather cramped. Heaving my bag on my shoulder, I made my way to the broad table in the middle of the cavernous room. With a grunt, I deposited my load, the bag slumping when I set it down, and the gold spilling out. Clint and Doimf set theirs on the table as well. We emptied them out and started to count the contents. That took a while. In the end, we had over 100 gold bars sitting on the table before us. Clint began to separate them into 2 piles. During the time we had been counting, the rest of the Doimf gang had arrived. 18 of the most cutthroat, merciless, and sadistic killers on the planet, each with over a dozen scalps on his belt. They stood around the table in a semicircle, in a manner that I did not find comforting. They were like, error, idiom does not translate, closer substitute, shark circling, waiting for the time to strike. Clint did not seem to notice. He continued to separate the bars into piles. 2 bars for us for every bar to the Doimf gang. He finished in our pile. There was 68 bars of gold, in theirs 34. Either pile was enough to make a man rich for the rest of his life. Clint packed them into the bags and slid it across the table to Doimf. There you go, said Clint. Your payment, 1/3 of the haul, as agreed upon. See, we have a problem. Want more, said Doimf. His eye glinted with greed. More us, more gold. Clint shook his head. We agreed on 1/3. That's what you'll get. No, we get all. The Uine's voice was a dangerous tone to it, and I could only see the rest of the gang drawing closer. In their hands they were clutching various knives and pistols, each of their faces twisted in a wicked smile. They looked like they were going to enjoy killing us. I'm curious as to how you think you're going to get it, said Clint, with an even more dangerous tone to his voice. The gang had not been around Clint long enough to realize that tone meant he was able to get very violent very quickly. It's simple. We kill you, we get gold. I don't know how you're going to get it from me. I'm certainly not going to give it to you. His voice dropped to a very dangerous low. And you don't have enough men to take me on. Doimf looked baffled. He was a single being, albeit a very large being, saying that 19 men were not enough to kill him. This had to be a joke. Ha! Good joke! Now give money. Come and get it. Clint backed up from the table, the gold bags held in his hands. I backed up as well, keeping Clint between the killers and me. He rolled his shoulders and squared his feet. I'm ready. Doimf nodded as the two of his gang as they stalked forward, knives held high. They approached Clint slowly, but with a precision, one on either side, trying to outflank him. They assumed that he was weighted down by the gold in his hands, and that they struck in unison, each to a side. Without blinking, Clint swung his heavy bags of gold up from the ground and sent them crashing into the attacker's jaws. I saw teeth fly from the impact of their heads snapping backwards, taking their spines with them. Before the others had time to react to what we had just done, Clint leapt at him, knives appearing in his hands. The nearest two gang members, big brutes, each holding a rather large pistol, dropped, blood spurting from their chests. 4 enemies dropped in as many seconds, and Clint was just getting warmed up. I backed up further until I was as far from the fight as I could get. I was not a fighter. I preferred to run, as it gave you more of a chance that you'd go on living. The rest of the gang finally processed what had happened, and they swarmed the man of stone. Knives, flashing, and guns aimed true. Those guns didn't help. They shot with skill and careful aim, but it didn't matter. Clint was too fast, ducking and dodging all attempts at his life. The knives left his hands and buried themselves deep into the chests of those holding a gun. 13 gang members were left standing in the cavernous room out of 19. In one large mob, they charged him. Clint danced amongst them, wind between the branches. None of their blades could touch him, but his could touch them. There, in that run-down warehouse, raged a storm of flesh and blood and metal, swirling about each other in a mad frenzy. In the midst of that storm of violence and death stood a pillar of skill and grace, beautiful and deadly. To watch Clint fight is a unique experience. Every being has a calling, and this is a fact. For some, that calling is building. They build soaring structures and beautiful monuments. For others, it may be painting. With a single brush, they can bring beauty to the world, where before there had been none. For Clint, his calling was fighting. To watch him is to see the storm of clouds swirling in the sky, great and terrible. To watch him is to see an avalanche unstoppable and charged with raw power. To watch him is to see the flooding river, relentless and vast. To watch Clint Stone fight was to see a supernova, full of brilliance and death. Those who stand in the way were obliterated. It was beautiful, it was terrible, and it was over. Clint stood amongst a pile of bodies, blood dripping from his hands and knives. He looked up at me, and I saw blood splattered across his face. He took a deep breath and let out a long sigh of release. Clearly, they weren't all that their reputation said they were, Clint said, his voice even and calm, despite just having killed 19 beings just minutes earlier. He looked around the room, counting the bodies. Hold on, there are only 18 here. Where'd the last one go? He asked, swinging his head around the room. I studied the bodies and realized which one was missing. Doimf got away, I told Clint. I glanced at the table and noticed that the bag of gold was gone as well. And he took the bag of gold. So it's a hunt, then. All right. If he wants to run, I'll chase him. He has what's mine, and I intend to get it back. We followed the Yuan across 10 systems, always just on his heels. We eventually caught up to him in Bryan and had to kill the Draken to get our gold back. End of chapter. I hope that you enjoyed. If you'd like to support the channel or the author, all the stuff is down below. And as always, I hope that you guys have a good one, and I'll see you in the next story. Cheers.